And next up, I have my segment for the day. I'm going to try to be brief on it because it's a complex issue, but it's this decision by Jeff Sessions to overturn the Obama policy, basically looking the other way on the enforcement of marijuana laws from the federal level for states that had legalized it or normalized it or decriminalized it one way or another. Specifically, states that had done things like issued licenses for dispensaries and grow houses and stuff like that. And before Obama did that, some of these places had already been set up and were rated by federal government enforcers. And basically, the Obama policy was, we're not going to do this. We're just not going to interfere. We're just going to stay out of it. And I'm hearing from a lot of people about it, and I think everybody's expecting me to flip my shit at Jeff Sessions, and my response is, of course, that's what he did. There was no reason to believe he would have done anything else. This is a guy that about 10 years ago said, marijuana is not used by good people. Good people do not use marijuana. I'd like to smack him in his big-eared, balding head. I really would. But I don't fault him for doing what he's always said he would do. He did kind of bullshit and lie during his confirmation hearings when presented with this issue. But in the end, you know who Jeff Sessions is. And instead of really worrying about this, everybody's worried about making the guy out to be a racist and a bunch of stupid bullshit during his confirmation hearings. So then this kind of thing happens, but it's not really his fault. Well, how can you say it's not his fault? He's the one doing it. Okay, he is a federal employee. He is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States of America. And there's federal law that says this stuff's not supposed to happen. I don't agree with it, but he has every right in his position, and some would say even should be mandated in his position to enforce the laws, not just the ones he likes and doesn't like. We can argue that, and I actually think getting the executive to enforce a law is one of the many checks and balances in the system, not just the limited checks and balances in the system they teach us about in high school. But it amazes me that all of a sudden liberals have discovered states' rights. You brought up states' rights to a liberal before yesterday, and geez, you were a racist, no matter what you were talking about. But now all of a sudden it's a states' rights issue. This is not a states' rights issue because no state has had the balls to challenge the federal government about it. The states have been cowards. Every state law in regard to this has basically said, we're not going to enforce it and we're going to let you do it if X, Y, and Z are met. And some of those laws are pretty good and some are awful. The one that just happened in California, everybody thinks legalized marijuana. The state has way more authority to prosecute people because of marijuana than they ever did before. You can check into it yourself if you want to see what I mean. And all the tax money they're going to raise goes to enforcing the laws. Doesn't do anything to help orphans with flags or any some shit like that. But that's not the issue. The issue here is none of these states have passed a law that says the state of Colorado hereby states that federal law in regard to marijuana produced, consumed, and exchanged within the borders exclusively of the state of Colorado does not apply within our borders. None of them have had the balls to do anything like that. And until one of them does, it's not a states' rights issue. A states' rights issue isn't, well, the state says you can and the federal government says you can't. Because constitutionally, again, not what I want. Principles over preference. If we're going to live in a constitutional republic, then we follow the freaking Constitution. Especially the people that are sworn to uphold and defend it and are tasked with doing so. Okay? And that would include the Supreme Court. So I don't care how liberal you are as a Supreme Court justice, you should be disbarred if you would vote to overturn this decision by the Attorney General, because it's nothing to do with the law. It's a policy. And executives get to set policy, and federal law is clear. I don't agree. It doesn't matter that I don't agree with it. Federal law is clear. These things are illegal according to federal law. And the federal government has every right to enforce that law until such time as the power is taken from them. I think our national Congress and Senate, they're cowards too. There's no doubt the majority of Americans are opposed to this war on cannabis. None. I know some of you out there, I think it's evil. I don't give a shit if you think it's evil. I'm telling you 70, 80% or more of people, this is not a 49-51 issue, want this shit stopped. But they don't have the balls to do it either. And again, this whole thing is a states' rights issue. There's no challenge by the state to the federal law yet. The question is, will any of these states have the balls to do it? And will people that all of a sudden are a fan of the concept of states' rights start following principles over preference, or will they stick to preference over principles and you're only for it when it fits your agenda. And that's the reason we're in this mess, folks. Because people don't care. They don't care how they get what they want. They just care that they get what they want. They're fine with circumventing the Constitution if it fits their agenda. But they're not fine with following the Constitution when it opposes their agenda. Cowardice. It is time for this to end. But if you want it to end and you want to be an activist at the state level, you need your state to take up nullification, not normalization and circumvention. If you want it done at the federal level, you got to start putting pressure on the Congress and the Senate. Now, why won't they do it? Mostly they won't do it. There's a few of them that are from like super conservative places where they could lose their jobs. Very few, though. Very few. The real reason is because they get paid. They get paid through lobbying, and who do they get paid by? In this case, they get paid by big pharmaceutical and the prison industrial complex. And those lobbies, and by the way, the alcohol lobbies. Those three lobbies have poured billions into stopping this. Billions. And the only way to make it right is an actual law rescinding federal enforcement of marijuana. It's the only way. It's the only way with principle over preference. Because otherwise you get what you got right now. When the executive changes, when the bureaucrat changes, the policy changes. This is the same thing I said about net neutrality. When you let the bureaucrats set the law changes with the bureaucrat. In the case of net neutrality, they gave themselves an authority they didn't have. In the case of marijuana prohibition at the federal level, they chose not to enforce a law that had already been passed. It's exactly the opposite and the same problem at the same time. But there is no case for state sovereignty here. None. Because the case has to be made by the state, and no state has had the cojones to make the case. No state has said, we won't let you arrest our citizens for the applicable use here within our state under the grounds that it was grown in the state, produced in the state, managed in the state, legislated by the state, and didn't leave the state's borders. It's not your business. Get out. None of them have had the balls to do it. You can blame Jeff Sessions, but it's not Jeff Sessions that put this law in place. It's not a defense of him. Again, I'd like to slap his big-eared, balding head right in the back of the head till he has a big old red mark on the back of his head. I really think the guy's a prick. You know? I really do. But I cannot make a principled argument against his constitutional authority to enforce this law. Because I will not put my preference over my principles. If you want to get somewhere in society, that's what we need to get the average person being willing to do. And then we'll actually face the issue instead of call each other names or instead of using whatever leverage we can to try to get what we want with no understanding of the long-term implications thereof. Just my thoughts.